Party people in the place to be. What's going on? It's me. I just got finished watching for the first time in many, many years, The Witches. This movie was already on my list of movies to rewatch. It's been years and years since I've watched it. There are bits and pieces I remember, but I didn't remember all of it or how it went together exactly. Like, I remembered the ending. I remembered what some of the people look like, and I remember some of the effects. I didn't remember exactly how it went together. I'm glad I rewatched it. It gave me a different perspective on the movie that may actually go into why I thought the way I did about the new trailer for the new Witches that's supposed to be coming out on HBO Max in the next few months. So this is the 1990 classic, and I'm going to say off the bat, the big difference between this movie and what we saw in the trailer is in fact the effects. And the big thing about the effects that makes it different is Jim Henson, is the incorporation of the Jim Henson Company. Jim Henson did the effects for this movie, which is why the effects still hold up, which is why, for the most part, the effects still hold up. Now, you can see some of the lines, like there's some like scenes where like one person is transposed onto a different scene. Like there's one scene with the mice on the bed and the grandma, and you see behind their shoulders to the grandma. You know, there is like one of those scenes where like you can kind of see some of the lines, but for the most part, it holds up, right? It appears like they got some mice, some actual trained mice to run like little mazes or do little tricks to run across one or two things as the characters, or run all the way through the hallway as the characters, and they stayed on a particular track to where they were supposed to go, even crawling underneath the thing. If those weren't real mice, those I think for the most part they were real mice that we actually saw moving. Once the mice started talking, then you could see the puppetry at work, and the puppetry was really good. Comparing that to the CGI mice that we saw in the trailer, the mice here beat it. The effects here definitely beat it. In terms of the acting, now, I did say in my review of the trailer that they were playing the new witches up more in the kitschy nature, more tongue-in-cheek nature of how they were acting. And that still holds true, but in a slightly different way from what we saw here with the 1990 The Witches. The original Witches movie, they did have outlandish things, obviously. It's a fantasy movie about, fantasy witches, not to be confused with the real witches, some of which apparently there's this huge witch renaissance. I don't know what it is, but I have a whole bunch of witches on my timeline. Some of my friends have a whole bunch of witches on their timeline talking about exes and shit. Like, apparently there's this huge witch renaissance. But the fantasy witches in this movie, it is played up for exaggerated evil. Right down to, in the big witches council meeting, half of those witches are dudes. Which I'm sure none of us noticed. We were watching as kids, but half of those witches are dudes. Like, legit dude. Like, legitimately, they're men. Like, especially once they take off their wigs. They're legitimately, and even when they're not, they're legitimately men. Like, very easily spotted men. Like, almost as soon as they come into the ballroom, like, that's a dude. Wait, that's a dude. Wait. There are a whole lot of dudes in the Witches Council in this movie. I guess to be played up for grotesqueness. I tried to look a couple things up. I couldn't really find too much before I started going on here. But I'm guessing to make them seem more ugly and evil and masculine looking, which, maybe that affected me in some way, with me not liking short-haired chicks, but or too masculine looking chicks. But, maybe that played a small effect on me. And anyway, the acting here, the most over-the-top acting that you're going to get in this movie are the transformation scenes, because they're transformation scenes, and from Angelica Houston, primarily when she's in the Witches Council Hall. She plays it to the hilt, and she plays it quite well. There's a reason why there's only one Angelica Houston. And she plays the hell out of this role in this movie. Most of the creepy factor in this movie comes from the angles that you see it in. Because there are a lot of stark angles in the camera work, and primarily that does convey a sense of what a child would see. It's not just straight on high def. It's what a child would see. It's angled. A lot of stuff is lower angled. A lot of stuff is differently angled. A lot of the camera actually moving, not necessarily just straight ahead or stationary or just like on a track. It's like moving in different directions. It's really well done how they directed this movie. It's directed by Nicholas Roeg, who does a pretty good job here. There are a couple of different things, if you're watching this brand new, that you would go back and see, oh, that's an old movie. You know, just basically the type of camera that's used in some of the shots. I would imagine that they filmed this in England, so some of the shots look like it was filmed with a camera that's designed, that has like the European specifications. I don't know if you've noticed that, but if you see a lot of stuff from England, particularly before the high def era, you can tell the difference. Like if you go back and watch like some WWF pay-per-views, like go back and watch SummerSlam 92, it looks different than every other pay-per-view in 1992. I think because there may be some translation difference in cameras used in Europe versus cameras used in the United States and even Canada. But yeah, there you can see that shot in some of the things. It's very British. It's very European. It takes place primarily in England. I think it starts. It almost seems like Norway or Switzerland. I can't or Poland. I can't. I don't know what. Let me see what Politi means. Norwegian. Thank you. So it was Norwegian. So it starts off in Norway, goes off to England, takes place in England. This is a very fast 90 minutes. Almost too fast in some instances. It's a very fast 90 minutes. The basic story of it, I'm not going to go into all the details. Most of you have seen it. I do recommend seeing it. Watching it, it's on Netflix right now. The basic story is this little boy is told these stories about witches from his grandma. His parents die. He goes to live with grandma, and they go on a holiday after grandma falls into a sugar coma because she finds out she's diabetic. So they go off to holiday, and on this holiday, they just happen to go to this hotel where witches are having their yearly convention. And the boy goes into this room to train his mice that he thinks he's going to train for the circus, and accidentally listens in on the witches' meeting. He then gets dosed with the witches' formula for turning children into mice. Witches, by the way, hate children and can smell them out. They smell them out. They turn him into a mouse, and then they then get their revenge by turning the witches into mice. And most of them end up killed or exterminated. And then at the very end, everything goes. He gets turned into a mouse. His friend gets turned into a mouse. At the very end, the witch's assistant comes and turns him back into a boy before driving off into the sunset. If all that seems very fast that I told you that, that's how it kind of seems once we get to the end of the movie. We started winding our way to the end of the movie. We got to the point where the kid is back home with the grandma, and I remember this part. I distinctly remember. What I did remember was that the kid's house, he had a little small sleeping house that his grandma set up on the night table next to her bed. That house was the Ghostbusters house. He had the Ghostbusters firehouse as his. It was the actual one. I know it was because I had it with the pole and everything, and the grates on top that you could pour the slime down. He lived in that thing. He slept in it. That was super cool. The kid already had an inclination to building like Rube Goldberg like things around the house for his mice and for him in general. So he kind of set it up for himself once he became a mouse and stayed a mouse and went back to live with grandma. It came very fast, the witch's assistant helping. We got no explanation as to how she figured this out. where the little boy lived and as to why she came back to help him, and little inclination as to why she was suddenly good. She was the Grand High Witch, Angelica Houston's assistant, through a significant portion of the movie. She got spurned by her and told that she can't go to the banquet, and so she mutters under her breath that she quits and eats alone in a room. And then we don't see her again until the end of the movie, where she comes back and for literally no reason turns the little boy back or turns the mouse back into a little boy. And the little boy yells, "Don't forget Bruno," which is his friend's name who got turned into a mouse, who is the kid we see in the trailer who just walks into the room with the witches. No explanation. One of the things is all the physical deformities that witches have, including their hands. Her hand is fine, and she shows it off like, "Oh, my hand is pretty now too." Like, they don't explain any of this, and I wonder if it was deleted scenes. I wonder if it was, it had to have been a timing thing. It had to be timing, but take a couple of extra seconds to explain that. Like, yeah, okay, happy ending, and the boy's turned back into a boy, but the assistant just seems like this wild Deus Ex Machina to come in and fix everything at the very last minute just because she couldn't go to dinner once with the Grand High Queen. That's weird. That's very weird. Like, how does she change from evil witch to good witch? Was she good the whole time? Was she infiltrating? Was she, did she want to be good the whole time, but was held back by the rules and regulations and laws of witch kind? And, once the Grand High Witch died, she and every other witch in the area died, she took over as the Grand High Witch, and now she can be good? Like, was the evilness an innate thing in all witches, or was it just, one of these Nazi things where, like, the Grand High Leader believes in it and enough people believe in it so that even if you don't believe in it, you kind of go along with it to not die? Like, what is they never really explained her face turn at the end of the movie, which was, I'm like, can we get a little explanation? Like, just a little bit. Like I mentioned before, in terms of the acting, in terms of the over-the-topness of, like, Angelica Houston once she takes her wig and mask off and goes full ham on the entire witch crowd, I feel like there's a difference between that and what we saw in the trailer. I feel like what we saw in the trailer was there's going to be a significant amount of ham from everybody versus a significant amount of ham at a distinct point by one character to get over how evil she is. And even then, it's mostly helped by special effects and smoke and angles and other things. She has her monologue where she hams it up, where she's pure on, evilness, right? So there is that, but at the same time, and you do get some different angles. Like Rowan Atkinson is in this movie. Mr. Bean runs the hotel. I think before he becomes Mr. Bean, or maybe it's at the very beginning. I can't remember exactly when he started Mr. Bean, but he is I forgot he was the hotel clerk in this movie, and he was. And there are different little things. The anticipation gets built up fairly well in this movie. Again, quickly, but well. The quickness of how things transpire in this movie is probably its biggest albatross, if there is one. It's probably the speed of how certain things happen. The speed of the wrap-up at the end. The speed of the reveal of Angelica Houston. Now, the reveal of Angelica Houston as the Grand High Witch is probably timed about right. The reveal of her for the first time ever feels a little sped up. And I don't know if that's because we tell the story in the beginning of the parents at first. I don't know if they felt like that was a big significant thing at first. They probably could have chopped off the first part of that and just gone to the little boy living with his grandmother. We didn't necessarily need the tragedy of the parents at the beginning. that could have saved us a significant amount of time at the beginning if you need more time in the end to flesh out how the assistant becomes good again. Flesh a couple of different, prolong before we see Angelica Houston for the first time so that she's built up. And honestly, I don't even think she was built up that much. The grandmother talks about witches and explains to the little boy about the lore of witches and, they don't have toes and they have long feet and all this other stuff, right? And purple eyes. But she doesn't get into the Grand High Witch. It's almost like the grandma doesn't know there's a Grand High Witch. They don't talk about her specifically. They talk about witches in general early on, and they don't necessarily talk about the Grand High Witch in particular. So when she does show up, there's a sting, and I get a feeling, because I know who it is, watching even for the second time, or if I watch for the first time and know who Angelica Houston is, have seen her in like the Addams Family, I get that she's supposed to be important. But if I'm brand new to this, and it is 1990, and I'm a kid, and it's 1990, so I'm 5 years old when this comes out, and I'm watching this, even as smart as I am about events and actors and different things, and I don't know that that's Angelica Houston from X or just the name, how do I know why I'm supposed to be afraid of this woman? Now, they go into it a little bit. She comes in, and all the women grovel towards her. And again, there's an angle thing. There's a disjointedness about when the witches are the focus of this movie versus other parts of this movie. So you do get this sense of unease when they're there. But the big grand reveal of Angelica Houston coming out of the car for the first time probably could have been built up a little bit more had we, makes me sound callous for saying it, but had we not dealt with the parents in the first place in the beginning, like had it just been little boy living with his grandmother, and we didn't even necessarily need to know how long that had been going on. Just know that's little boy living with his grandmother. Didn't need that part in the beginning. So that's the speed of how a couple of different things works is probably his biggest albatrosses. Not knowing why the assistant at the end becomes a good witch it's sticking in my craw. It's kind of sticking in my craw. I'm going to have to find out. But it's sticking in my craw. They don't explain it. They don't go into why, other than she couldn't eat with the other witches. So that kind of sticks in my craw a little bit. In terms of why this is still talked about to this day, some 30 years later, yes, the special effects, the practical effects and practical makeup and practical use of real mice, even for a lot of the angles and these Rube Goldberg things that pique your interest, that keep your interest in the movie, particularly as a kid, but even as an adult, that keep your... And Rube Goldberg stuff was big around this time. Fucking Pee-wee's Adventure, and there are a bunch of other movies and TV shows where somebody always had this big, stupid, elaborate thing to wake them up in the morning, right? To show how smart they were or whatever. And this was no different. But all that stuff keeps your interest. My interest wasn't going to necessarily wane watching this. My interest will probably wane watching the new one because of CG, because of the lack of practicality, and because of... I'm not going to say how serious they're taking it here versus how unserious they would take it in the new one. I'll say the different style of hammery here versus there. This old one, there was some playing up because of the world that it was in. And obviously you can't get too serious with it because then it would just be a tragedy, right? So, it's a fantasy. So there is some element of fun in some of these portrayals. Angelica Houston, particularly when she's up on that dais for the first time, you can kind of see her having fun with that role. But you don't see her acting. Versus I saw Anne Hathaway and Octavia Spencer. I caught them acting in that trailer. You don't necessarily catch Angelica Houston acting here. You're just kind of there with her. And again, the angles of the camera shots and the practicality of the effects that they use versus CG makes this one stand out and hold up better in that sense. Now, if in this new movie they explain why the assistant becomes a good witch, or they, flesh out the Anne Hathaway big reveal towards the end better, fine. Or maybe even if they cut off the whole parents thing in the beginning, maybe that can be something that they would have done better than this movie. But I kind of doubt it. And honestly, the big takeaway from the entire movie, just like the big takeaway from the original Witches, is going to be all of that wrapped into one and what you see on the screen, particularly with the effects. And the effects in the trailer they don't hold up to the 30-year-old Witches. They don't. Practical effects, in most cases, hold up better. Stop motion, puppetry, it holds up better because there's a thing. It's maybe it's a slight corner of the uncanny valley, but there's a thing. I know I'm watching cartoons in the new Witches trailer versus this one. I know I'm watching something real, something I can hold in my hand. I could have in 1990 held the puppet for little Luke, held the puppet for little Bruno in my hand. I can see the hairs on it. I can see the movement. I can't hold those same little CGI things, and my brain knows that. And it knew that at 5 years old the same way it knows that now. The exact same way it knows that now. And it knew that when computer animation, all that stuff started coming into play about 5 years after this. I knew that. Like, you can't just get away with this excuse, kids are stupid. They know what they're looking at. Like, that's just laziness. And maybe that's what really pissed me off about the original Witches trailer, or about the new Witches trailer versus this, was that I could sense some, if not laziness, then just not knowing. It didn't feel as malicious as they were just lazy. It just felt like they just didn't know because of years of other laziness. It just felt like they didn't necessarily know. Stanley Tucci is probably going to be the guy who runs the hotel. That, fine for him, I suppose. Like, I don't necessarily see him doing much better than Rowan Atkinson did in this. In terms of the whole takeaway from this movie, is it still the classic that holds up today? Honestly, not entirely. Looking back on it again, like I mentioned, the holes in the story, it's not a 15 out of 15. It is still very well done, however. The story itself is fine. It's just the pacing in certain parts. So, out of $15, the original Witches, 1990 movie, is worth $12.75. And I'm saying $12.75 because I was jostling between $13 and $12.50. So I'll say $12.75 because of the pacing and because of that ending. Yeah, I don't know how comfortable I am giving it a full-on 13, but I also feel selfish about giving it like $12.50 or lower. But that ending was rushed. The pacing, like I mentioned, of some of the things were rushed. The effects still hold up. The primary reason it's that high is because of the effects and because of the overall story. And the acting. The acting is pretty good, actually. The little boys that they have, they're pretty well. The grandmother, Angelica Houston, like I said, she hams it up. One of the little boys, Bruno, his parents are pretty good. Rowan Atkinson is pretty good in it. Even, like one of the chambermaids that Rowan Atkinson is going off into the corner and doing it with. Apparently, nobody noticed this in a 1990 family film. But, that he's going off with, she's pretty good. Like, the acting is fairly good in this movie. The only thing that brings it down is the pacing of some of the parts of the story. Really, that's primarily it. Like I said, I don't think this new one for HBO Max will hold a candle to this at all. at all. I think they got a very good cast, but I think they're going to ham it up too much in a different style than what was hammed up here. I think the effects are going to be completely lackluster in the worst way. It may have been rushed even, but if the effects are anything like we saw in that trailer, and anything can happen from the trailer to the actual debut. Maybe, just maybe, they fix some stuff. Maybe, just maybe, they go over it and re-examine it. But I don't believe that they will. The reception that I've seen on some message groups and even a couple of Twitter was like, yeah, I'm excited to see this. Like, all right, are you just starved for something to watch? Or, like, do you not remember the really great parts of the original? Like, the really great effects of the original? And how actually scared you were of what you saw? So, yeah, I feel like $12.75 is about right. I can't give it $12.50, but I don't think I can give it $13 either. Primarily because of the pacing and how the ending turns out. Party people, tell me how the ending of this video should have turned out. Down there in the comment section, what is my problem? And why didn't I give this 15 out of 15? Am I just dunce in the head? Am I just an old fuddy-duddy because I don't like the new reboot that everybody loves because it's new and a reboot? Because we're doing it again, so I have to love it. The consensus from the zeitgeist is any brand new reboot of anything, I'm supposed to love with full adoration and joy and affection because it's brand new and because I was told to. Well, tell me down there in the comment section why I was so wrong in that regard. Like, share, subscribe. Patreon.com/0469 helps keep the lights and the drinks flowing at the party. And party people, that, unlike the CGI on this new Witches piece of garbage, ain't bad. Salud.
I'm a nice guy, I'm a nice place, with a nice smile on my nice face. Turn it back and I'm making sure my night's straight. And when you're out of town, I'll be making sure your wife's straight.